Have you ever wondered what set the stage for the most devastating conflict in human history, the Second World War? Our journey begins in the aftermath of the First World War. This colossal conflict had left Europe in ruins, and the Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was meant to ensure peace. But instead, it sowed the seeds of another, even more catastrophic war. The treaty demanded heavy reparations from Germany, plunging the nation into economic depression. The people were desperate, and in this desperate climate, a once obscure party began to rise, promising a return to glory: the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or as we know them, the Nazis. At the helm of this party was a man of fierce ambition and terrifying vision: Adolf Hitler. Hitler's charismatic speeches resonated with the German people who were tired of their struggles. He blamed the Treaty of Versailles and the Jews for Germany's downfall and promised to restore the nation's power. By 1933, Hitler was the Chancellor of Germany, and the Nazis had gained significant political power. But Hitler wasn't satisfied with merely ruling Germany. He had grander designs. He wanted to expand Germany's territories to create a vast German empire, or Lebensraum. This vision led to the annexation of Austria and the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia, with little to no resistance from the rest of the world. The world watched in silence as Hitler's ambitions grew, hoping to avoid another conflict. However, the real turning point came on September 1, 1939. Germany invaded Poland, an act of aggression marking the official start of the Second World War. The world could no longer stand by and watch. Britain and France declared war on Germany 2 days later. Thus, the world was plunged into a conflict much larger and more destructive than anyone had anticipated. The war had begun, and the Axis powers were on the move. But how did they manage to gain such momentum? In the early stages of the war, Germany, Italy, and Japan, the key players of the Axis alliance, saw significant victories. Germany, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, capitalized on Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, a strategy involving rapid, concentrated military campaigns intended to create disarray among enemy forces. This strategy was particularly effective in the invasion of France in June 1940, which led to the fall of Paris within a mere 6 weeks. Meanwhile, the Battle of Britain was underway. Germany sought to cripple Britain's Royal Air Force and gain air superiority, but despite intense bombing raids, the British forces stood resilient. The British victory in this battle marked the first major defeat for Germany, and it was a turning point that began to shift the momentum of the war. Simultaneously, Germany was expanding its reach into Eastern Europe. Poland, Denmark, Norway, and the Low Countries fell under German control, further bolstering the strength of the Axis powers. Over in the Pacific, Japan was making its own aggressive moves. Emboldened by the idea of a Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, Japan sought to extend its influence throughout the region. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 was a stark demonstration of this aggression. This devastating attack on the United States Pacific Fleet marked the entrance of the U.S. into the war and the beginning of a prolonged and bloody conflict in the Pacific. At this point in the war, the Axis powers were in control of vast territories across Europe and Asia. Their initial successes were largely due to swift, aggressive tactics and the element of surprise. However, these victories would not go unchallenged. The Axis powers seemed unstoppable, but the tide of war was about to turn. The world watched in horror as the Axis powers advanced, but the Allies were not ready to give up. How did they manage to push back? In the heart of the Second World War, a series of key turning points began to change the course of history. The Battle of Stalingrad, one such pivotal moment, unfolded in the winter of 1942. Here, the Soviet Union demonstrated their might, resisting the German forces in a brutal months-long siege. This grueling combat in the icy Russian landscape marked the first major defeat for Hitler's army, and it sparked the beginning of a shift in momentum. Then came the monumental Normandy invasion, known as D-Day, in the summer of 1944. Thousands of Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of France in an audacious amphibious assault. This daring operation marked the start of a major offensive against the Nazis in Western Europe. The courage and sacrifice of those involved in D-Day led to a crucial Allied victory, further turning the tide against the Axis powers. But perhaps the most controversial and devastating turning point was yet to come. In August of 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The sheer scale of destruction and loss of life was unprecedented. It forced Japan's surrender, effectively ending the war in the Pacific. Each of these events played a vital role in changing the course of the war. From the frost-bitten ruins of Stalingrad to the shell-shocked beaches of Normandy and finally to the atomic wasteland of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Allies fought back with tenacity and resolve. With these decisive victories, the Allies began to turn the tide, leading to the eventual downfall of the Axis powers. Their actions, born out of necessity in the face of a global threat, ultimately shaped the world as we know it today. The war was nearing its end, but what were the final moments that led to the conclusion of the Second World War? As the Allies pressed on, the heart of the Axis powers, Berlin, stood on the brink of collapse. The city, once a symbol of Nazi strength and determination, was now a battleground. The year was 1945 and the Soviet Red Army was closing in. The battle for Berlin was fierce and brutal. The Red Army advanced from the east and south while the Western Allies paused at the Elbe River. After 2 weeks of intense fighting, the city fell to the Soviets. In the midst of this chaos, ensconced in his bunker, the man who had instigated this global conflict, Adolf Hitler, met his end. On April 30th, Hitler and his wife Eva Braun committed suicide. The architect of the Holocaust, the instigator of war, the man who dreamt of a 1,000-year Reich was no more. Days later, on May 7th, Germany offered its unconditional surrender to the Allies. The signing of the surrender document occurred in a red brick schoolhouse in Reims, France. General Alfred Jodl, representing the German High Command, signed the document marking the end of the war in Europe. But the Second World War was a global conflict and it wasn't over yet. The war in the Pacific continued to rage. It wasn't until September 2nd, after the devastating bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that Japan formally surrendered. The ceremony took place aboard the USS Missouri, anchored in Tokyo Bay. Representatives of the Japanese government and the Imperial General Headquarters signed the Instrument of Surrender, officially bringing the Second World War to a close. And so, the world's most devastating conflict came to an end, leaving in its wake a changed global landscape. The war had ended, but the echoes of its devastation would reverberate for decades to come. The war was over, but its impact was far from finished. What were the long-term effects of this global conflict? With the fall of the Axis powers, it was clear that the world could not afford to repeat such a devastating conflict. The need for a global peacekeeping body was more evident than ever. Thus, in October of 1945, the United Nations was established. Its charter, signed by 51 countries, aimed to prevent future wars, protect human rights, and promote social progress. Yet, even as the world sought unity, new divisions were forming. The power vacuum left by the war saw 2 new superpowers rise: the United States and the Soviet Union. Their ideological differences led to a tense standoff known as the Cold War. This silent conflict would dominate global politics for the next 4 decades, shaping the world in ways we still see today. Meanwhile, the end of the war prompted a wave of decolonization. Empires crumbled as colonies across Asia and Africa demanded independence. Nations such as India, Indonesia, and numerous African countries emerged from the ashes of imperialism, forever altering the political landscape. In the Middle East, the creation of Israel in 1948 marked a significant shift. The establishment of a Jewish state, in response to the Holocaust, sparked decades of conflict and controversy that continue to reverberate today. But amidst these geopolitical shifts, we must not forget the human cost. The Second World War claimed the lives of an estimated 70 to 85 million people, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. It left deep scars on the global psyche, influencing art, literature, and philosophy for generations. The aftermath of the Second World War was a time of great change and reflection. It reshaped nations, birthed new ones, and sparked ideological battles that defined the 20th century. It forced us to confront the darkest aspects of humanity while also inspiring hope for a better, more peaceful world. The Second World War, a conflict that changed the world forever, is a testament to the horrors of war and a reminder of the importance of peace.